Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Hues of Beauty podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to share with you a little origin story as to how I ended up with a practice that focuses on treating people of color. So, let me start with the origin. Like when I was a kid, I always knew I wanted to be a doctor. Um, I was a kid who had a lot of health issues, and I spent a lot of my childhood in the hospital. And so I always had this admiration for nurses, doctors, just because they were the people who helped me a lot when I was growing up. And so I wanted to be that person for somebody else. I wanted to go into medicine and help somebody out who was having some sort of health issue, things like that. And so I decided that I was going to go to medical school. Now, that was not a difficult decision until I got into medical school and realized how hard it was. But I am the queen of perseverance. And so I stuck with it. And I also enjoyed it, quite frankly. There were a lot of subjects that I truly could see myself, a lot of parts of medicine that I could see myself doing. And so, because I'm a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, I kind of wanted to go into emergency room medicine. But that didn't really work out because when I did my first rotation in the ER, I realized that I didn't like the fact that I had to hand over my patients to like an internal medicine physician, for example. I didn't quite know how things ended. I was in charge of stabilizing them when they came in, but I never got to get the end of the story. So I was like, scratch that. So let's do something else. So I ended up doing internal medicine instead. And this was definitely great for me because internal medicine is quite broad in terms of like the cases that come in. And again, you have to do internal medicine before you can specialize in anything like cardiology, rheumatology, infectious disease, all of that. So my personal interest was in pulmonary medicine and critical care, primarily because, again, I am asthmatic, so pulmonary made sense for me. And critical care was something that I truly enjoyed. The downside, however, for me was the fact that I could not handle the stress of living in the hospital all the time and not getting enough sleep. I found that my health declined significantly during residency, both mentally and physically, just because of how rigorous the activities were. So, unfortunately, I couldn't pursue my dream of becoming a pulmonary critical care physician. And so I decided to do outpatient medicine. And so I got my first job right out of residency. This was in the South. And when I was there, I wasn't there for long, but it was my first time in the South. And I don't know what I was thinking. I think I thought it was like it was 2016 at the time. And I thought, okay, all the things that I learned in school probably don't exist anymore. Again, I'm a kid who grew up in Africa. So my view of things were a little bit different. And so I went to the South with this notion that everything was going to be great. I was going to be taking over, not taking over, but potentially taking over someone else's practice who was about to retire. I'd have my own patients and I would be able to practice medicine the way I was hoping to, right? So a few things came up in the South. First things first, people did not like me. I was the only Black female doctor in the entire hospital system. Oh my God. And apparently I had been the first that was hired. Prior to that, there was only one Black male. So that was problem number one. And then I was young. So that was problem number two. And yeah, so I had a lot of issues. I faced quite a bit of racism. Racism in the South is interesting. It's very in your face. So, you know they're being racist. I had colleagues who were racist towards me. I had patients who refused. It's funny. I told this story on TikTok and it went viral, where I talked about how I had a patient come into the room and he was like, I don't want to be touched by a Black person. It's like, I want a white doctor. And I was like, oh, okay, this is this is interesting. And obviously I'm not a white doctor. And I was like, there is another white doctor, but she's not in. So you can make another appointment. And yeah, so I had incidences like that. That was just one of them. There was also another incident where one of my patients was a police officer And he really liked me, and he was really excited to have me as his doctor. And we had such great conversations, and I really helped him out with his health. And one day he like gave me his card and he was like, I want you to call me whenever you get into trouble. And I was like, what makes you think I'm gonna get into trouble? And he was just like, you might get pulled over. And he was actually, I'm not gonna say he was in a high position in the police force. But he said it without saying it, that because of the color of my skin, there was gonna be a high likelihood that I was gonna get into trouble, aka pulled over for driving, you know. And then that was just like one of many stories that things that I experienced in the South. But one of the unfortunate things that happened, or fortunate depending on how you look at it, is the fact that within a few months of being in this hospital system, they went bankrupt. So the backstory there is that this hospital system had been struggling financially, and there were talks about another hospital system purchasing the hospital. So what they did was they hired a bunch of doctors, new doctors, to kind of fill up their books and to make it look like it was a hospital that was doing really well, all hoping that they would get purchased. And then unfortunately, the deal didn't go through. And so I remember this so well. I feel like it was January 31st. It was a few days before I had bought a house and I was about to move into my house the next week. And I got a call that we were going to be closing down the hospital within a few days. And I literally only had a month left to work. And I was like, okay, I guess this is not gonna work out. Imagine having your first job and you're like in a place where honestly you don't have the best experience, and then you end up losing the job in a very abrupt sort of way. So that was pretty tough, but I had already noticed a few issues with regular medical practice when I was there. So first issue I found was that I couldn't practice medicine the way I wanted to. When I first started, I had to build up my panel. And so I had more time with patients, which is what I really appreciated. I could spend an hour with a patient, really get to know them and work through their medical issues. And as my panel got larger and larger, I spent less and less time with patients. And that really bothered me because, again, maybe it's because I'm neurospicy, but I need time to talk to people. And I feel like people appreciate that. And getting to the point where like people would bang on my door because I am spending more than 15 minutes with a patient, that truly bothered me. So that was one thing. And then another thing was I realized that insurance was not necessarily going to work for me. When you work with insurances, there are a few things that you have to pay attention to from the physician side, but the biggest one is reimbursement. You don't get reimbursed a lot of money per patient per visit. So that explains also why a lot of physicians have to see many patients in one setting in order to make some semblance of a decent salary. And also the amount of work that it takes to get things done. I mean, you needed to have so many staff members to be able to do things that wasn't necessary. So an example is a prior authorization. Like that, honestly, if a physician says that you need a medication, you shouldn't have to jump through hoops because of an insurance company just to get that medication through. That there are just so many things I did not like about traditional medicine. And then when I was in the South, I noticed that the culture in the South was very different from the North, in that the lifestyle component of medicine was just kind of ignored. So I would have conversations with my diabetic patients, for example, and I would talk to them about the importance of, nutrition and limiting certain foods and things like that. And the mentality there was just give me the medicine so that I will feel better and I will keep eating my king cakes and all the other things that were most likely causing the illness that I came in for. And so I really struggled with that because I was just like, I can't change people, like no matter how much I would counsel on lifestyle and trying to prevent diseases, because that's really my thing. I'm more of a preventer than a treater. That was not going to fly down there. So when I lost my job, I was like, all right, I'm going to start my own practice. I'm going to go back home. I'm in the DMV, and I'm going to try to create a practice the way, like, try to practice medicine the way I want to practice it. Okay. So my initial practice was in Virginia. Well, I'm always in Virginia, but I started out with a direct primary care business. And so direct primary care is as it sounds. So it's direct primary care. So the patient pays the physician for primary care services. This was back in 2017. And so it really wasn't popular then the way it is now. And when I was here in the DMV, I really struggled to get patients because the DMV is very heavily insured. So trying to explain to people that, you're trying to get them to pay cash and not use their insurance for healthcare, like it just didn't make sense, right? Because for a lot of people, well, that's why I have insurance, right? I'm supposed to use my insurance for primary care services. So I really struggled in the beginning with that practice, and I couldn't figure out how I was going to grow it. And so one fateful day, somebody called me, and I was like, oh my God, thank God someone called me. They want services, right? No, this woman called me because she was wondering if I did Botox. Yeah, I know it's a funny, crazy story, but that's literally how it started. So she wanted to know if I did Botox, and the reason was that she only liked doctors doing her Botox. And she had called up dermatologists and plastic surgeons in the area, and apparently they were full and nobody could take her, and she wanted to know if I did Botox. Now, I didn't know at the time, but now I do. A lot of primary care physicians will supplement their practices with aesthetic treatments like Botox. And I had always been interested in aesthetics, but I always thought that maybe it was something I was going to add on to my practice, but not, I wouldn't do it primarily as a way of serving my community. Okay. But at the time, again, I was struggling financially because my direct primary care practice was not working because nobody wanted to do direct primary care. And so I was like, all right, well, why don't I just get training in Botox? Okay. So that's literally how I stumbled into aesthetics. I never took a dermatology residency. I had no interest in dermatology related things. In my head, when I was going through residency and medical school, dermatology was supposed to be like super easy. I mean, it was hard to get into, but it was just kind of like the thing that like we looked down on dermatologists because we were like, us medicine people are doing the real medicine, and the dermatologists are just looking at skin and that's it. Um, Obviously I know that it's not that simple, but yeah, so I was like, all right, I will learn how to do Botox and see how it goes. So I was lucky enough to be able to get training from not Galderma, from Allergan for free, which was a blessing at the time. This was pre-COVID. I don't think they do that anymore. So I was trained to do Botox and fillers. And so I started offering those services in my office. And when I started doing that, my aesthetic side started to grow and my medical side didn't really grow and never really grew from there. So as my aesthetic side grew, I ended up having to close my medical business. So I continued doing aesthetics, and that's when I started doing social media. I would do Facebook lives and I would do some Instagram lives and just do some posting on what I was doing with Botox and fillers. And one of the interesting things that happened was that I was attracting certain groups of people. As a woman of color, I never made the connection, but as a woman of color, I would start to attract women of color. So I started to see more Indian patients, and I started to see more Hispanic patients, and I started to see more Black patients. And they were coming in not just for Botox, but they would have other issues as well. Like they would have hyperpigmentation, they would have melasma, they would be struggling with acne. And they would ask me like, hey, do you know anything about this? Can you help me? And I'm like, I'm a doctor. I have access to resources. I can learn how to deal with this and come up with a treatment plan for you, right? So that's how I started. Someone would come in for Botox and they would have another problem. And I would say, hey, come back and I will see what I find out and I will help you. And so that was how that kind of started. I just noticed the trend I think it happens with social media. You attract like-minded people or people who look like you. And so I was attracting more people of color. And as I was doing more research, I was finding that there wasn't a lot of information on people of color or skin of color. It's funny, I have a cosmetic dermatology book that I'm using right now to prop up my computer. And in that book, it's about 500 plus pages. And the skin of color section, I think, is only 9 pages. And that is true for so many dermatology books. It's just ridiculous, you know? Skin of color is just that thing that honestly, people don't learn a lot of, you know? I had to do so much research to start understanding, hey, things are different for skin of color. The approach is different. The way that we use products is different. Like their problems are different. And so that was really like interesting. And I started to see more people of color. And then something happened, COVID happened. And so when COVID happened, I lost my practice because I was still a baby practice. I was only about a year in. And during that time frame, I was also pregnant. And so towards the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020, I wasn't really working much because I was trying to sustain the pregnancy. And so I lost everything during COVID. And I was like, all right, it's 2020, I have a new baby. I know I love skincare enough to want to do it again versus going to get a job because I really didn't think I was employable. I don't think I'm employable at this point. And so I was like, all right, let me consider starting over. But am I gonna do the same thing? You know, I wasn't really sure, you know, and I had thought about doing skin of color, but I was a bit apprehensive because again, I had started out with aesthetics and doing Botox and fillers, which is more of a cosmetic dermatology side of things, right? And plastic surgery. But wanting to go into skin of color, I felt like, oh my God, I'm not a dermatologist. Do I have enough expertise to do this? And then George Floyd died, or he was murdered. That was tough. I remember watching everything that happened, being so, 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 so angry about the whole situation. And in my head, I just heard this voice like, you can do something. You can create a safe space for people of color. And I was just like, oh my God. I mean, again, I've had this experience of experiencing racism. It wasn't just in Louisiana that I experienced racism. I've experienced racism in other places. And because of that, I had so many doubts about whether or not I could do something like this. But I just kept hearing it like, you got to do this. There has to be spaces in the world, in this country, where people of color can come to feel safe, you know? Um, and so after that happened, and after deciding that I was gonna do something, I restarted my practice, started all over. And I decided that I was gonna focus on treating people of color and treating skin of color and doing aesthetics for people of color because, you know, nobody does anything for us. If you go into an aesthetic practice or dermatologist's office, most of the time, it's not catering to people of color. When I go to laser conferences, I mean, they don't really mention how to treat skin of color. I mean, now I'm starting to see more of it, but before it wasn't even a thought, you know? And so you would have a lot of laser reps come in and they will say, oh, you know, we can use this, you can use this device on all skin types and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of times you get sold devices that truly are not sufficient or cannot be used on skin of color. And so there's a lack of knowledge about the importance of focusing on skin of color. Well, at least when I was starting out, there's this idea that people of color will not pay for aesthetic services, which I think is ridiculous. Because hello, do you guys know how much we spend on our hairs? And there's also this I don't know. I think that there's a big fear of treating skin of color. And that's because with skin of color, you can get a lot of complications that come up if you don't know what you're doing and if you treat too aggressively. And again, not enough education is out there on skin of color. And so I decided that I was going to do my own little part and I was going to focus on skin of color. And it was a scary thing. Okay. And, I remember I told somebody about it and they were like, oh, I'm going to refer some people to you because, you're starting your practice over, you're going to need customers. And I got feedback from this person and they were like, well, I talked to some people about it and they went to your website and didn't feel comfortable because there are only people of color represented on your website. And I was like, huh, interesting. I guess I don't know. It was just one of those things. I was just like, huh, is this what I'm gonna have to deal with? Will people choose not to come to my office because I treat skin of color? I mean, I treat everybody, but my focus is skin of color. So when I'm buying a laser, for example, I have to make sure that it's something that will work for my patient demographic. And while I'm saying skin of color, a lot of people have this assumption that skin of color means black skin. But in the dermatology world, skin of color is basically Fitzpatrick 4 to 6. So it includes Asian patients, it includes Hispanic patients, patients of mixed heritage, and Black patients. So skin of color is basically people who, have more highly melanated folks. Okay. So it's not just Black people. I treat Asian patients, I treat Hispanic patients. And the reason why this is important is because, yes, our skin types are more problematic, our skin types are more sensitive. And so it can be scary because if you look at the complication profile out there, a lot of it tends to be with skin of color. So I get it. I get that it's scary. I get that people are worried about getting lawsuits and all of that. But I was just like, you know what? I'm going to do it because I'm interested. And it would really suck if I went into a place and I needed help with my skin and someone would say, oh, your skin is too dark. I can't treat you with a laser. I feel like that would be terrible for me because, like, I mean, what do you mean? Like, my skin is too dark, right? And so I just wanted to create a safe space for my patients, and kind of build a community of women of color who are interested in skincare, interested in aesthetic treatments. Just, it was so important to me that there is a place where people can come and feel comfortable. Okay. I tell my patients, come in with your bonnet on. I don't care. Come in with whatever you want to come in with. Like, people just come in and they feel themselves. Um, and there's something that I always say. I feel like when people come in, they leave their stress at the door. When you are in America, you have to put on a certain armor, invisible armor, as a Black person or as a person of color, to then go into the world to deal with the world and all of its shenanigans. Okay. And so I feel like when people come into the office, they leave that shield outside and they come in and they just relax. They can just be like, hey, Dr. D, what's going on? Or talk to my staff. Right now, both of them are Hispanic. And so there's just so much that happens in the office. We always have Afro beats going on in the office. And it's just a very chill environment. Um, and I can just feel I can feel people relax, when they come in. And it's amazing. And it's also amazing for me because when I'm in the office, I can also relax. Yes, I have my armor on when I'm going outside. But then as soon as I got into my office, it's like my space is where I'm going to see people who make me happy. It's where I'm going to help people. It's just really, really such a blessing. And it's not how I thought I was going to practice medicine. I had this whole plan in mind, but then it turns out that, again, what I wanted to do was not going to work with my health. And it turns out that a random phone call led me down a rabbit hole that is now aesthetics for people of color. So that's a brief version of the story. And so at the end of the day, Delight Medical and Aesthetics is an aesthetic practice that focuses on treating people of color. We primarily focus on treating skincare concerns. We also use aesthetic procedures to help with skincare and anti-aging. And there's also a wellness component to it as well. I really make sure that whenever I'm talking to my patients, we're not just talking about skincare products and procedures, but we also talk a lot about lifestyle, nutrition, things like that, because I'm very passionate about that. And at the end of the day, you cannot talk about skincare without talking about nutrition and lifestyle because they're very, very much intertwined. And so we try to create a more holistic approach when it comes to skincare. When we're doing aesthetic procedures, I go for a more natural look. I am not trying to overfill you. I'm not trying to do too much. I'm very conservative with the way I do treatments because, again, these treatments, um, a lot of people overdo things, and I'm not like that. I want you to look good, but not look like you've had anything done. Like that's usually my goal. But anyways, that's a little overview of the story of Delight Medical and Aesthetics and how I ended up with a aesthetic practice that focuses on skin of color. I hope you like the story, and I will be talking to you guys next week about, I don't know what I will be talking about next week, but I'm sure it will be just as juicy as this episode. So stay tuned for next week. And thank you so much to all the people who come to the practice. I absolutely love you guys. You guys have made my last couple of years amazing and have pushed me towards more education because you guys are very encouraging of my content that I post on social media. And now I'm doing this podcast so I could reach more people. So thank you so much. And yeah, if you are interested in joining a Facebook group that I have, it's called the Delight MD Tribe. I will be doing lives in there as well, just answering questions that people always ask me. And I'll feature some of those on the podcast as well. And I'm also on social media. So make sure that you follow me on there as well. All right. Well, I hope you guys have a great day. And I will talk to you on the next episode.